So we're here on Daf Tzadi Vav now, and we saw in the Mishnah the case where he's got 5 possible marriages, and in the Resha he is Amrlo Mesa Ishtecha, and he's allowed to marry 3, 1, 3, and 5. And then in the Sefer, he had a relationship with Shnia, or the Revius. And the Mishnah twice uses the phrase Mesa Ishtecha, or Yimba al Shnia liachar Misa Sarishona. Now, the Gemara is going to ask the following question: why the repetition? So we're now on Daf Tzadi Vav, and we're looking at the Gemara. Atu kulu lav liachar misa sarishona ninu. All the cases in the Mishnah are after the Rishona died. So why did the Mishnah bother repeating itself and say liachar misa rishona? On Rav Sheshes liachar misas rishona vada. That in the previous cases he got a false testimony that his wife had died. In this case, we know that she actually died, and that's when he married the Shnia. Okay. Ben Tesha Shonin. The Mishnah says that if he's 9 years old, then hu posel tchila, meaning if he does maimar, he passes the Yevamot for the other achim. The achim, on the other hand, even basof, not just betchila, they passel the Yevamot onto the bentes. So now we assume that the difference between a katan and the other brothers, which is emphasized in the Mishnah, is that the katan is only posel betchila, the achim are posel even besof, and all this is a reference to bias katan. And the Gemara says, Ben Tesha Shonim Yom Echad Tchila Pasil Besof Lo Pasil Vatani Rab Zvid Bar Rav Oshia Ose Maimar B'Yevimto V'Acher Kach Ochiv Yehu Ben Tesha Shonim Yom Echad Oleha Psola. That if the older brother, who's a gadol, does Maimer in his Yevamot, and then the Ach of 9 years old has a relationship with the Yevamot, Psola, she can no longer fall for Yibum to the Achiv HaGadol. So we see that Bias Katan Poseles, even after the Gadol made a Maimer. Because it says also Maimer B'Yevimto. So now we have a difficulty because the Mishnah says that a katan pasels tchila, implying that bias katan would not pasel basof if the older brother did a mimer first. So Gemara says Amri, there's a difference between bias katan and mimer katan. Bia of a katan pasil afilu basof, but maimar tchila pasil besof lo pasil. That's the difference between the bia of a katan and the maimar of a katan. The Gemara asks, "Ubia afilu besof pasil." Is it really true that the bia of a katan, even the besof, is pasil? Pasil meaning pasil to the Yevamot and the Achim. V'aktani says in our Mishnah, Elisha hu posel ilav v'heim tchila besof. Ketzad ben Tesha Shonim Yom Echad shebal Yevimto pasal al Yidei Achim. And that's only betchila and not basot. So we see that the Mishnah is talking explicitly about bia, and yet it's only passes basot, only passes betchila, not basot. That's against the previous answer the Gemara offered that the bia of a katan passes even the basot. Gemara answers chisuri mechsere v'hachi ketani ben teisha shanim yom echad hu posel tchila ve'hein posem tchila besof b'medvar amur b'maimar aval bia poseles afila besof ketzad ben teisha shanim yom echad apol yivimto posel al yidei achim even after the other brother did a maimar. Now, obviously, the Mishnah is talking about the maimar of a katan. At least if it was tchila and it passes aliyah. So the Gemara asks, "Umi ikole maimar klal." Does a katan in fact have a maimar that could generate a psul on the achim? Al yidei achim. V'atanya ben teisha shanim yom echad hu posel b'davar echad. V'achim poslim al yodo be'arba dvar. Hu posel al yidei achim b'bia. And that's the only way that the katan would generate a psul on the achim, only with bia, not with maimar. Achim posel al yidei bia maimar v'get v'chalitza. So that means that even after the katan did a bia, if the achim did any of the above, whether it's bia, maimar, get, or chalitza, he becomes psul on the katan. But you see clearly from this brisa that a katan could only pass on the achim, only bia, but not b'maimar. That's against the way we understood our Mishnah, that our Mishnah holds that a katan who does a maimar, tchila, passes on the achim. Now the Gemara is going to take the position now that even the maimar of a katan passes on the achim. Either brisa only mentions that a katan is supposed to be davar echad, meaning bia. And that's because bia is pasal bein b'tchila bein b'sof. The bia of a katan passes on the achim, whether it was first, before the maimar of the achim, or b'sof, even after the maimar. And therefore it's psikal, and therefore there are no differences. It's an absolute law. And it's mentioned in the Mishnah. But the din of maimar, which is now conditional and limited to betchila pasal, b'sof lo pasal, lo psikal, it's not absolute, and therefore it's not included in this list of the contrast between katan and the achim. Itmar nami omer Rabbi Yehuda omer Shmuel yesh lo get. If a katan gives a get to the Yevamot, it passes on the achim. V'chein omer Rav Tachlifa bar Avivi yesh lo maimar. If a katan does a maimar in his Yevamot, the passes are on the achim. Tanya nami hachi yesh lo get yesh lo maimar divrei Rabbi Meir. If he gives her a get or maimar, he passes her on the achim. Really interesting that a katan could have a get. So the Gemara asks, "V'savar Rabbi Meir yesh lo get." A katan could have a get. But Tanya, we learned in a brisa, "Asu bias ben teisha k'maimer begadol." The Chacham made a takana that the bia of a katan ben tes should be kona the Yevamot li'asra al achim as a maimer of a gadol. Of course, minat Torah, a katan is not kona as Yevamot. Maisa katan is not a maisa. Vein kinyan or kinyan. But the Rabbanan made a takana that his bia should be considered like a maimer, and it should be kona her to generate an iser on the achim to require get. But she's not muteres l'shuk without chalitza. Rabbi Meir omer asu chalitzas ben teisha ki get begadol. That the chalitza of a katan is like a get, and it passes her on the Yevamim, on the achim, just like a get of a gadol, which if the gadol gives a get to the Yevama, she becomes excluded from all the other achim. V'im Isa, if Rabbi Meir holds that the get of a katan passes the Yevama, why does he say asu chalitzas katan ki get shel gadol? Listening ki gita, his own get. Why do you compare it to the get of a gadol? Amar Afuna Breid Rabbi Yeshua Islay. I'm going to assume that Rabbi Meir does accept that the get of a katan is posel. Vizutar, but yet it's not equal to the get of a gadol. It's less. Zutar means it's weaker. Lachain, and therefore, Rabbi Meir compares the chalitza of a katan to the get of a gadol to tell you that the chalitza of a katan is like the get of a gadol, which is greater than the get of a katan. Now, what does it mean that the get of a katan is weaker than the get of a gadol, whereas chalitza of a katan is equal to the get of a gadol? Why is the get of a katan inferior to the get of a gadol? The Ram Gamliel di Amar ain't get achar get. This is back on Daf Nun. And the Gemara there quotes a machlok Shin Ram Gamliel Chachamim in a case of a man who has two wives and he dies and they both fall for Yibum. And the Yavam gives a get to one of them and then he gives a get to the other one. And does the get to the Sheni validate a get? And therefore the krovos of the Shnia are asuras olav mishum achos grushasel. According to Rav Gamliel, ain't get the achar get. Once the Rishona gave her a get, she needs chalitza, but nevertheless, the zikas yibum is paka from the shnia. So on the get that was given to Rishona generates an isa on the yavam with regard to both wives, and the get of the sheni is eno klum. It doesn't register. That's why I'm going to leal shita ain't get liachar get. So the second get is not considered a get, and it doesn't generate an iser on the yavam who gave that get, the sheni, regarding her relatives, like achos krushaso, etc. So the Gemara says, Hani mili. When does Rav Gamliel maintain that ain't get liachar get? That's only begadol achar gadol. That the Yavam Gadol gave a get to his Yevama. After the Gadol, the other Gadol gave a get. That's considered two equal gittin, and the second get is totally invalid. Furthermore, katan liachar katan. If the katan gave a get, then the second get of the katan to the other Yevama is not considered a get because they're equal. But in the case of gadol liachar katan, if the katan gave a get to one of the Yevamos and then the gadol gave a get, ahani, then the second get that was given by the gadol is valid to generate an iser on the gadol regarding her krovos, because the get of a gadol is more powerful than the get of a katan. So there's no koach, there's no power in the get of a katan to be mafkia the entire zika, and therefore this left of the zika, the zishraim of the zika that still is there, such that the gadol now afterwards can give a valid get to be mafkia the remainder of the zika. So we see that the get of a gadol is more powerful than the get of a cut, because in the case of a get of a katan, it is not meaningful after the get of a katan, meaning since they're both equal, so the one is not superior to the other, therefore the second get doesn't register at all. But if after the get of a katan, the gadol would give a get, then that get would be effective to generate an isa on the krovim. So therefore, Rabbi Meir, when he wanted to address the case of chalitzas katan, he equated it dafka to a get of a gadol, not to the get of a katan, because the chalitza of a katan has tokef, it has power, like the get of a gadol. And therefore, chalitzas katan would be effective after the get of a katan. Right? So when we compare the get of a katan to the chalitza of a katan, the chalitza is more powerful than the get of a katan. And just like we said that the get of a gadol is meaningful after the get of a katan, so too the chalitza of a katan is meaningful after the get of a katan. Now, what happens if a gadol gives a get after the chalitza of a katan? So that would be equivalent to a get after a get, and the second get is not chal, because we upgraded the status of chalitzas katan to that of the get of a gadol. So just like in the case of a get of a gadol, there's no subsequent validity to a get. There's no validity to a subsequent get. So too, after the chalitza of a katan, there's no validity to a subsequent get on the part of a gadol. Again, these are all drabanos. Now, that was all according to Rabbi Gamliel, who holds the ain get liachar get. L'Rabbanan, the Amar yesh get liachar get. If a man gives two gittin, the two yevamos, one after the other, or if there are two brothers who gave gittin one after the other for the same yevama, the get sheni is considered a get. That's the shita of the chacham. So now we find that there's an adifus, a greater power to the get of a gadol than the get of a katan, as far as this din is concerned. Why? How? Hani mili. When do the Rabbanan say yesh get liachar get? That's only get gadol achar gadol, or get katan achar katan, when they're all equal. And the Rabbanan are going to recognize the validity of the second get to generate an isa on the krovim. Avol katan achar gadol lo mahani, because the get of a katan is on a lower level, and therefore there's no validity whatsoever to the get of a katan after the get of a gadol, and she's not considered grushas hakatan. There's no koch in the get of a katan like there is in the get of a gadol. That's going to Rabbanan who hold yesh get liachar get. And therefore, as we said before, Rabbi Meir wants to equate the chalitza of a katan to the get of a gadol and not to the get of a katan, because the chalitza of a katan has more of a tokef equal to that of a get of a gadol, as far as the din of get liachar get, and chalitza katan is effective even after the get of a gadol. Just like the get of a gadol is meaningful after the get of a gadol. So the bottom line is that chalitza's katan is not similar to the get of a katan, but rather to the get of a gadol. And that's true both according to Gamliel and according to the Rabbanan.